Good morning and welcome back. My name is Kyle Rojas Legleiter. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Senior Director of Policy Advocacy at the Colorado Health Foundation. Thank you all for joining us at this year's symposium and continuing these conversations with us. My colleague Aaron Brown began the last panel by inviting you to imagine a sandbox. I'm going to begin our next panel presentation by inviting you to imagine your own community. However you define your community, however you think about your community, imagine it. Imagine how you know your community. Imagine what is in your community. Now take a moment to imagine how you would like your community to be known. Imagine what you would like to be in your community. Did you imagine two different things? Notice that. Notice that difference. Notice that gap. That gap is where the work is. That gap is the difference between the status quo in our communities and that new normal that Aaron mentioned in the last panel. I'm pleased to introduce you to our next conversation, where we will get to hear from 4 people who have been called to the work that lies in that gap. And they will share with you their perspectives of how they are navigating through that work, what they have learned, what they have experienced through doing that work, how they themselves have participated in it, how they've been called to it. And I'm excited to introduce you to 4 very incredible people, so I'll invite them up to the stage now to join me. So joining me on the stage now, we have Eudelia Contreras, she, her, Liza Marron, she, her, Zoe Mpofu, she, her, and Lisa Wade, she, her. These 4 people have at least one thing in common, and that is that they have received recognition as prize winners from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Culture of Health program. So congratulations to you on that recognition. That recognition is not the only notable thing about these people, and so I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you. And my first question to you all is, help us to meet you, for those of us who have not had the pleasure of meeting you before. Help us to know you in the way that you would like to be known, and bring that into this space. So we'll start with you, Eudelia.
Thank you. My name is Eudelia Contreras. I live in Leadville, so very close by. I am the lead community organizer for Lake County Build a Generation. My main focus in my work is community organizing in manufactured home parks. Most recently, we've accomplished our first resident-owned community in Lake County, something that we're very proud of. Thank you. I have lived in Leadville for about 30 years. Before that, we came from California. Before that, from Mexico, from Zacatecas, from Chalchihuites. It's always interesting because I get asked, or when I'm talking to folks, like, oh, Leadville, it's a beautiful place with the mountains. Like, I bet you grew up skiing, and what brought you all here? Because we came for the mountains and the skiing, and I'm like, we came for housekeeping work and construction work is what we came here for. I'm now starting to learn how to ski because of wonderful programs that we have now in Lake County. My kids are learning how to ski and how to love the outdoors, but that's not what it was for me. Growing up, I was your child that probably checked off all of the boxes on an adverse childhood experiences. I remember very clearly being in the 8th grade and sitting in the very back in the auditorium because I wasn't sure if I was even going to high school because my grades were so bad, attendance was bad. And now I sit in that auditorium as the president of our local school board. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Good morning. I'm Liza Marron, and I am with the San Luis Valley Local Foods Coalition. I'm coming to you from the great San Luis Valley. And I was raised on the banks of the Mississippi in the Midwest in Iowa to a very loving family where my mother felt the industrial food revolution liberated her from the kitchen with things like minute rice and TV dinners and Wonder Bread. And I can remember at the age of 12 going out in our manicured lawn and chopping out a garden and planting corn and tomatoes and beans. And later, we moved to Michigan. We moved around a good bit. We moved to Michigan, and I was blessed enough to go to Michigan State University. And about 2 years in, I got a summer job in Granby, Colorado at a horse ranch where I fell in love with many things, including a cowboy, and didn't go back to college, didn't go back to my family. And I've been in Colorado ever since. We moved to the San Luis Valley to work on the High Meadows Buffalo Ranch, which is now part of the Mackinac and the Zapata bison herd that you might visit when you come to the Great Sand Dunes. And my cowboy didn't work out, but so I went to work for the Saguache County Department of Social Services, where I met the lechuqueras of Center, the lettuce workers there, and made a very good friend who, she spoke Spanish, I spoke English, but we were friends despite. And it really inspired me to go to Adams State at a late age and get a degree in Spanish and learn that language. And it was there that I learned that the jerky she shared with me was venado, or deer, and I was very thankful to learn what that actually was. During that time, I ran a youth mentoring program and became a foster mother through that experience. I bought a home in Saguache, which I believe there's actually more people in this conference that are in my hometown. Saguache means the land of blue water, the land of blue sky, depending on who you talk to, but it's a Ute word, and we are on stolen lands from the Ute, the Dene, the Pueblo people, and many others who use the San Luis Valley as their summer grounds. And then as we were doing this work with youth, we talked about how we wanted to involve healthy eating, active living. And the Colorado Health Foundation was a very integral part of funding us. We were the first cohort of Live Well communities. And it was during that time that food security became a big topic of conversation. And the fact that we're this big agricultural valley and nobody who lives there or works there can really access the food we grow, but what we can access is those big box stores, processed food. And so we've been working to create an equitable local food system there, which I'm really excited to talk about. And a really poignant moment for me was when the father of one of my foster children stood in my driveway and was so excited to take a Cooking Matters class aimed at diabetics as he was healing from an amputated foot. Cooking matters, people. I'm talking to my mother and all the mothers and fathers out there. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Zoe Mpofu. Full name is Osuwangwe. I am coming to you to reflect on my work in Buncombe County, which is in western North Carolina, or you may have heard of Asheville. Asheville is also the ancestral lands of the Eastern Band, and so we're honored to continue to be beneficiaries of preserving. And if you're not familiar, western North Carolina, we are some of the oldest mountain ranges, the Blue Ridge in the world. So I have been doing my best to understand what it's like to be in young mountains. So I'm so breathing. So today I'm hoping to, in this conversation, be able to impart kind of my style and my approach to messaging, formalizing action, and then also mobilizing. I have been working in public health improvement, community health assessments, but I arrive in this work from having been a House and also U.S. Senate staffer, and then also I've worked in education policy. And I'm also very passionate about climate initiatives and am connected to some of those, as I think that there is no health equity without considering climate. And so I use climate very broadly. And so today I hopefully will be able to share with you some of the tools that I have used to keep the conversation on equity, inclusion, and belonging hot, but defined by those who care about an inclusive world that is driven by Ubuntu. In other words, I am because we are.
Wali Jan and said Odali so wait Suzette Land, Tatina Eslan, Night Daniana Kayach Tintiar and Tidakatna is Dakadi. Night Daniana Kayach, Executive Director Kahosna. I'm sorry for the translators. Let me help. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Lisa Wade. I'm the Executive Director for Chickaloon Village Traditional Council. It's one of 229 federally recognized tribal governments in Alaska. I'm getting used to your mountains as well. We're at sea level, so my breathing is like panicky a little. Best thing about being up here is no mask. I'm in reverence of this place. I am, when I was thinking about what I am, what I'm all about, and my work is grounded in developing sacred relationship. And I have been just wandering around in awe, even walking from the parking lot over here in reverence of the flowers that you have that are different from the flowers that I have. And so I've been working on my sacred relationship with this place. And so I want to speak a little bit to the work that I do in our community in Chickaloon around how we develop healthy relationships and how we develop and deepen those relationships and partnerships. So that's what I'll speak to today. And most importantly, I'm a mother to a beautiful daughter here with me today that is over there being my videographer and photographer. So that would be Ela Na'ina Agnew, which is Ayla the chickadee from the Strong Place. Chinan.
Thank you all so much for that introduction. It's a real pleasure to be up here with you. I can think of a million questions I would love to ask each and every one of you. I'm sure that the folks in our audience are probably also thinking the same things. There are note cards on your tables throughout the room and all that. If, as we move through this conversation, there's a question that you would like to bring into the space, please write that down on the card. Staff will be moving about the room and picking up questions, and we'll have some time to read questions from the audience as well. But Lisa, I want to start with you and sort of picking up one of the threads that you mentioned in your introduction about understanding and building relationships with folks and all that. And my understanding is a lot of the work that you've done in your community has focused on sort of reimagining what we think of when we think of research and understanding a people and a place and a community. So can you talk a little bit more about how you've been approaching that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I hear public policy and public health backgrounds, and when you work in the tribal world, you essentially develop de facto degrees in everything because you have to figure out all of these things coming at you, describing and defining who you are as a person. And when I first started doing this work as our health director for our tribe, I would get these manuals that would cross my desk, right? We all publish these manuals, are grant funded, and we get this funding to produce these manuals that define and talk about our situation. And not one of those manuals contextualized why. Not one of them. They just said, we have the highest mortality rates, we have the highest, smoking rates, we're gonna die off we're in the grave before you know it, right? And so I started questioning, why is that? Why is that defining my community that I know of all of these beautiful strengths that they have? And, the more I would read through that, it's kind of a parallel track, I have to say, because at the same time we were finding coal mining in our community. I know this is a mining place, but I will just tell you, we have a coal mine that is less than 2 miles away from our tribal school, the only tribal school in the state of Alaska that's owned and operated since 1992 by a tribal government, the only one out of 229 tribes, out of the whole entire state. And they wanted to open a coal mine 2 miles away from that. And so the community, of course, was at odds. We were at odds. Everything was really tense. And we started looking to those health, social determinants of health, which I call indigenous life determinants, right? What's going to sustain our life? Because when you talk about social determinants of health, those aren't all the life-sustaining things. Because I know, because I had to keep adding to the list, and they would say, that's not part of social determinants of health. But we get to define our own, right? So, you know, at the same time we were using these tools, I was so angry. I was just frustrated. My grandmother, our clan grandmother, said, you know, they did this in the 1900s. Please don't let them do this to us again, because they almost wiped us out last time. And those were kind of marching orders. So I had to figure out how to be a policy expert, a legal expert, but also like how to interpret that data and how to really look at that data in a way that supports our survival. And what I was recognizing in that data, they were calling us subjects or participants, or, you know, we were this objectified thing, right? When we know we are people, you know, we are people with all these multidimensional parts to ourselves that are important, right? So we started re-envisioning this, and we started talking about that, and it wasn't until it clicked really this year that it kind of came full circle for us, where we started saying, you know what we really are? The people that are being studied, the people that are being evaluated, you know, they're really the leaders. They're the leaders in this work. They're leading the work. They're sharing with you things that are private, that are personal, and they're leading this world to a better understanding of the condition, that sacred condition that we all have being connected to each other. And so, you know, we're trying to now focus on this educational process and this process of bringing people together to say, how do you want to be defined? You know, we know how we want Chickaloon to be defined. We've talked about this. We've come together and we've thought about this so long, to fight those minds, to fight the many different things that are always coming your way to take your sovereignty away, right? Every day there's some new sovereignty fight. And really what it boiled down to was sacred relationship and defining ourselves in the way that makes sense for us, and encouraging other people to do that. Because the more that groups of people that are those unique people that are the ones being studied, or the ones that are being evaluated, are telling people, we're not that, we're this. These are our strengths. It's more than community-based participatory research, right? Those words are hollow to me unless they include a component that says, we're gonna let you lead this research. We're gonna go in the direction that you wanna go with it. And then we're gonna give it back to you. So anyway, that means I talked long enough.
Thank you for that. Eudelia, I want to turn to you and sort of pick up on a thread that Lisa put out there of, you know, we all contain a lot. We heard a lot of the things that make you who you are in your introduction. And when you put that together in community contains a lot. We don't always necessarily experience things the same way, think the same way, make the same meaning out of what we're experiencing and all that. But one of the things we often hear from community, even though we're not monolithic, is we don't want to just admire our challenges. We don't want to just think about our problems. We want to move into action and do something about that. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you've approached that? You know, sort of the differences that you see within your community and navigating through that into taking action on some of the things that you hear from community that they want to see change in your community.
Yeah, I think the first thing, somebody said this to me, a really good friend of mine and coworker, this work is a form of privilege, and that has stuck with me. And so when going into community, especially, like I said, I mostly do work with our Spanish-speaking community, our immigrant community, manufactured home parks where I live as well. And I need to remind myself of that not everybody has had the lenses to look through that I do. So empathy probably, I guess, would be something that I'm always trying to remember, and that we see things differently. I mean, sometimes going into to these communities, we also have to be careful of what we're coming in and what we're going to do, because people have been let down so much, have been taken advantage of in these communities so much. So when you come in and we're going to fix your problems, and they're like, well, what do you think our problems are? And there, even for me, even living within these communities, I remember very clearly in the community that I live in, that I was organizing, I said, oh, I know what's going to come up. It's going to be this one thing. We did focus groups, we listened, and it was something very different than what I thought. So always have to make sure to listen to community and what it is that are the things that they want to work on within the communities. And then also, if they want to take the lead on that, do they feel comfortable taking the lead on that? I think in our organization, the focus has been for a long time community-led work. And and also, if I always think about, like, okay, let's go talk to the commissioners, or mostly commissioners is who we would talk to, and have them change this thing. And they're like, who are the commissioners? Who are those people, and what do they do? You know, so also kind of taking a little bit of that lead as well, and going with people to, this is what this meeting looks like. I remember my first school board meeting. I was terrified. I had no idea what I was voting on because I didn't come from a family that sat on school board, city council, or any of these things.
Thank you. Liza, a lot of the conversation I've heard up here in Keystone so far has been about the power of partnerships, the necessity of working with others in this work and all that. I'm wondering if you could tell us a story about a partnership that you've engaged in your work, in your community, that you found to be really powerful. And what was it that you experienced in that power of working together?
Thank you, Kyle. And so the San Luis Valley is the largest high mountain valley in North America. It sets at 7,600 feet, ringed by mountains. You basically, other than going down to our friends in New Mexico, have to come in and out of a mountain pass to come to the valley. So we very much know how to rely on each other for what we need. And I love my friend Aaron Miltenberger's story about stone soup, and how everybody brings what's needed to the table and what they have to the table, and then we have exactly what we need. And that's the richness of the fabric of the community in the San Luis Valley, that we all work together and really leverage the few resources that we have. We're very, we're not well known for our wealth. We're known for our persistent poverty. I actually hate the grant writing world where you have to, spell out the atrocities of your community and the traumas and the deficits, when really we are so rich in natural resources. We have 46,000 souls living in 8,000 square miles, and if you think of the fresh air and the room, and it's so beautiful to have these things, and people know how to make something out of nothing. We have, homes built out of adobe, which is just the clay of the soil. And so there's so much rich knowledge in our communities, and a partnership, I guess the one I think of is that, because we were in the first cohort of Live Well communities working to, create equitable, healthy eating and active living access in our communities. And I think of San Luis Valley Great Outdoors. And it's not just one partnership. We come together, the Boys and Girls Club, La Puente, the Area Health Education Committee. So many beautiful organizations come together to really increase the quality of life in our community. But especially during COVID, I just think about how, we all have our communities where we have food apartheid and we have no access to outdoor recreation. And San Luis Valley Great Outdoors was working on, especially during COVID, opening this beautiful Malvia Malm Trail that gave access to the south side of Alamosa to the Rio Grande for the first time. I heard one resident say they didn't even know the Rio Grande ran through their neighborhood because there was no access to it. And also to the wildlife refuge. And then, the local foods coalition working, with our community to provide land access to grow food, and just all this beautiful work supported by the Civic Canopy, which I know that our beloved members of Civic Canopy are out there, but they've been entrenched in our community, really helping us strengthen our partnerships and the work that we want to achieve there with, the models of success that we don't always know about. So it's just been really powerful to experience that, and thank you.
Thank you, Liza. So continuing on this theme of working in partnership or collaboration with other people or groups and community, one of the things that we hear about really often is that in those kinds of partnerships or working across, that people bring different assets, different levels of power and privilege into that kind of relationship. And that can make things sticky, messy, beautiful, whatever word you want to describe it with. Can you talk a little bit about experiences that you've had where you've encountered that dynamic of different levels of power and privilege, being resource rich, resource not rich, and how partnerships have navigated that successfully?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, first I want to say that in my work leading a community health improvement advisory council, and that's something that in North Carolina we're statutorily required to do if you are a jurisdiction that produces a community health assessment, a CHA, or a community health improvement plan, a CHIP. And it's throughout this 3-year cycle. So we have this, cross-sector, and there's no absolute definition of who is there. And what we have experienced is, obviously we're having those that are steeped in traditional, clinical care, but we're also having those that are, showing up across the levers, from upstream, midstream to downstream in social determinants. If you are familiar with the Bar High, we have been really intentional to ensure that we have levers of action and capacity. And one of the frameworks that we have adopted and we have actually kind of hacked and made more appropriate and aligned with kind of our local parlance is collective action, and we are very much aligned with kind of like collective impact, and it's the kind of 3.0 version as coming out of the Tamarack. And what I will say is we have embraced the concept of VUCA. This is a military term, but so much peace building can actually be done by appropriating some of their methodology. And VUCA, it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Embrace those, use them to propel you. And I'll say another component of this, that has been really key to making sure that if we are to actually have measurable outcomes to realize health equity, has been around narrative. And so one of the key components of narrative transformation has been using asset-based language. I think we've already heard today that one of the biggest hindrances is how we label, is how we other, and really kind of marginalize important and meaningful contributors in this work.
Thank you for that. My next question is actually for all of you, and it's, that I was really struck by that concept of VUCA. Can you say what the acronym stands for? Volatility,
uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So, and this is something that the Marines will often employ, but I will tell you, a lot of peace building actually has adopted, kind of those, because there's so much formalizing and studying that comes from our military.
So when I heard those 4 things, it sort of hit me of like the cumulative experience of the last few years. 2019 was the last time that we were able to gather in person here in Keystone for this kind of symposium, and VUCA has been what I have experienced. I think what many of you have experienced in the time in between. One of the moments from this year's symposium that really struck me was in the morning yesterday, if you all were here, when Karen invited people who had experienced a loss, a grief of some kind in the last few years. And so many of us stood up in that moment and all that. And so to sort of reflect on the work that we all have been doing in that kind of environment of VUCA through loss and grief and trauma and all that makes me think about sort of the theme for this panel presentation, which is overtime, and the sense of working harder than ever, working in ways that are different, maybe in ways in how we had worked or approached community or working on challenges before. And so I'd like to invite each of you to think a little bit about what are some of the ways in which the last couple of years called on you to work differently. Are there ways that you want to leave behind, never again? And are there some things that you did differently, that you experienced differently in the last handful of years that actually served you in your community that you want to keep and to carry forward? And whichever one of you would like to pick that up first.
That's a really powerful question, and I have to admit that yesterday when that question was asked, it brought me to tears, probably like many of us. So, to come from Alaska, to come from Otna people, which are the people of the central interior, where it gets to be 50 below on a regular basis, you had to be strong, and your community had to be strong for survival, right? We all had to be strong, and we all had to survive together in what I call now that sacred relationship, but basically it was, in their relationship with each other. It was a relationship of reciprocity, respect, values, responsibility, and generosity. Those are really the tenets of it. Those are kind of my core values, my guiding principles, right? And then came along this really rapid, what happened across the nation over 400 years happened in Alaska in about 100. Boarding schools are just a thing of recent past for us, like real recent. Like my chief went to boarding school. And so around the early 1900s, the Spanish influenza came through our community and wiped out a big percentage of our families. And the way my grandmother described that was that before the pandemic, the song was strong. And then after the pandemic, the song went silent. And that was the only way that they could verbalize that pain of loss, that they lost so many people that they couldn't talk about it. And so that, that's in our DNA, that's in our very recent history up there. And so fast forward to 2019, the first thing that hit us when we got the notification of this going around was fear, just this profound fear that crept in. So not only are we dealing with all the trauma and trying to heal from, all the systems of oppression that are around us, that are holding us in place, trying to anyway, give you a hint there. But we also were dealing with how to protect our elders, how to protect our children. And so we had to really quickly shift and really come together in that relationship that we have, which is what I'm assuming was a lot of like what they had to do back then. And the first pandemic was my great-grandfather was a leader, great-great-grandfather, I gotta go back further. And he helped keep our family intact by keeping people outside in that relationship with the outside, right? They knew something even back then about what germs did and things like that. And so we really went back to a lot of those teachings to say how we're going to protect our people. And so we isolated our elders, we isolated our families, but we kept intact with each other every single day. We had our staff working from home and making phone calls to check on people and just to make sure that their basic needs were met. I jokingly say that it was like jumping on a treadmill, because whether, there were some of us, much like the healthcare folks, and props out to all of you. I have a daughter that's a nurse as well. So, I likened it to like getting on a treadmill. We all got on this overtime treadmill, right? And it didn't stop. It was like all day long, nonstop of something, whether it was somebody sick or somebody needs groceries, and we didn't want anybody to go to town because we didn't know if that could make them sick because they're more vulnerable, right? And so there was a lot of coming together, and really, I think the hardest part for us was that we had some elders pass that were really meaningful elders in our tribe. One of them was a council member, and his nickname was Sunshine. They always brought sunshine to everyone. And the way we put people to rest is a very sacred way of doing that. We come together and we grieve together through song and dance and sharing of generosity of food and gift, and we couldn't do that. We haven't been able to do that. And so it's been really challenging to keep this momentum going of positive community building and partnership and sacred relationship, while at the same time, dealing with all of these extra losses and not knowing how to do it in the way that we know how to do it best. It doesn't make sense to us right now. And so we're finding our way through, and we've actually, I'm really happy to say, we've planned a potlatch now, which is what our ceremony is for August, and I'm so happy that we'll be coming together and honoring those people as they pass. But, the positive side of this, because it's not all been negative for us, is it has reaffirmed our need for each other. It's reaffirmed our need for that sacred relationship that we have with each other. That responsibility we have to protect each other, the responsibility we have as a people to take care of not only the ones in our immediate family, but the most vulnerable among us. And a healthy society, a healthy community takes care of the most vulnerable among us. And if we can do that, we create healthy environments. What's good for those values is good for everyone. So, Chinen.
I'll tell a story. We have a lot of rich stories in COVID and a lot of deep loss as well in the San Luis Valley. And one of those stories is around, we are a rich potato growing region, and in the time of COVID, especially in the wintertime, the indoor warehouse work is, a lot of people in close quarters, many Spanish-speaking monolingual speakers. And in the beginning of COVID, they weren't receiving any PPE, they weren't receiving any information, public health information in their own language. There's JBS, there was 7 deaths at JBS. This isn't a part of our community, but it's this Colorado community, and just really deep inequities in public health in the people of color that the foundation of our food system is on their backs. And Project Protect rose up during that time out of Frontline Farms and Fatima and Damien, and they just started fighting for a Farm Worker Bill of Rights. And I'm a member of the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, and I think of it as a very democratic and beautiful organization. But during this time, there was a great divide. During this Farm Worker Bill of Rights, there was a great divide between the farm worker community and these rights that we were fighting for decency, like, breaks and shade and long hose and banning those short-handled hose and many different things that were really oppressive in the farm worker practices on our farms. And so Rocky Mountain Farmers Union came out against the bill, and that was a big divide between the farmer and the farm worker community. Meanwhile, Project Protect built this system of promotores, and so we had the promotores del Valle, and Zoila Gomez, one of our beloved community members, headed that up, and they were going into the farm worker communities, giving folks information in their language of choice, providing food boxes, and really helping people who are staying at home, making people aware of laws that said, the new laws that said during a public health emergency, your employer has to pay you so you don't have to go to work sick. And there's just so much education and rallying of some of the most marginalized members of our community, and it was very profound, very profound. And another piece that directly impacted the San Luis Valley Local Foods Coalition. Our big projects are, we have a 38-acre farm incubator, and we also have a food hub. And the and both of them stayed, COVID was kind to us. People turned to their local food systems when their long, fragile supply chains broke down. And also government became humane for a minute, and it was sending money for like the people and for food and for housing and putting moratoriums on evictions and all these things that we've been fighting and working for, that maybe some little virus helped us move along. But another piece was the educational loss that was taking place. And in a partnership with the Boys and Girls Club, we had for many years wanted to do this junior incubator where we were teaching young people how to get their hands in the soil and restore their historic connection with the seed and the soil, the farmer, the harvest, the land. And the Boys and Girls Club and other partners were able to obtain funding to give experiential learning to combat the educational loss that young people were experiencing during COVID, and to get them off that screen fatigue and give them hands-on experience. And so we were able to build our Rising Stewards educational program at the Rio Grande Farm Park. And so there was a lot of beautiful outcomes of COVID, as well as the really sad losses.
So I'd say this pandemic really, to frame it for us, it accelerated change and clarified challenges. And some of those challenges that it clarified was the need for us to really connect with our constituents to build civic muscle. And so some of the ways that we really focused in building capacity around civic muscle was understanding that we are actually allowed to wear the A hat as an advocacy. And that our role in public health, it is actually, we are very much advocates, and we are quite often, I think, given being limited in being able to be in that sandbox of public discourse. But I will say that Frameworks Institute has a great guide that really outlines when are you engaged in advocacy, when are you engaged in lobbying, and so lays it out quite beautifully for those particularly who are wearing a public service hat. But also, I think it's very important for us, for you to share with your partners so that they can know why you aren't able to show up in other ways and how they can, kind of pinch it for you and backstop or advance some of that as, being part of your civic muscle bench. One of the most important ways in which we saw the civic muscle is the census, appropriations, understanding that if you are going to address health disparities, you've got to be able to have the data behind it. And so much of that, and we think of, who's counted, right? And then also behind it, the resources. So any of these infrastructure plans, nothing can, it's important at that, federal level, but when you come down to the state level and then you come down to the county level, it's defined by who's counted and who's actually included in the census. And so we actually made, and then also your political boundaries. Again, do you know what the most important, the county health rankings, their proxy for community cohesion, you know what it is? Voter registration, because it's something that you can get at the block and lot level. And it also something that you can parse out down, by different demographics. So civic muscle, really, really important for us. And I will say that, some of the hallmarks of this change, it's been incremental. We were one of the first communities in the US, and July 14th, you may know it as Bastille Day. For us, it was when Asheville, North Carolina was one of our city council passed community reparations resolution. And so, fast forward 2 weeks later, I was really honored to be part of the penning of a resolution around declaring racism a public health and a public safety crisis. However, it didn't happen overnight. There was many a times, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, where I had to really color outside of the lines, put my job in jeopardy, and, risk losing, my paycheck. So, however, I don't just show up to this work for that, clearly. But it's incremental, and I will just say, it's possible. So never mind what kind of political climate you're in. My former House member is Mr. Mark Meadows. My current House member is Madison Cawthorn. So I challenge you to do better.
Something that I think we in Leadville and Lake County Build a Generation, that we, right in the pandemic, it sounds like we all of our organizations had to pivot and do things differently. And so we, like I said, we're community organizing, but we saw a need for direct service. And we partnered with other nonprofits and pivoted into this. So first of all, we saw that there was a need for people needed food, and so we really leaned on our local pantry, our food pantry, and we were pretty much, because we got the privilege to work from home, and letting people know, like, you can sign up for food boxes, and we created this system of volunteers, and here's who's signing the people up that need the food boxes, here's who's going to take the food boxes, and this is all in partnership, like I said, with other nonprofits and St. George, which is our local food pantry. And that is something that we just had never really done before, and so that was a piece of it. And then the other piece was, I was very impressed how we were able to also, again, because of partnerships, bring in funding from some of our different funders that were unrestricted funds for folks that didn't have access to public assistance benefits, whether because of income or assets or documentation. And so this was a whole separate fund that was created with very little restrictions and very little qualifications, I guess, for folks to be able to access these benefits. And then what was really cool is that, so we had a group of folks taking in that information. What do you need help with? It's rent, how much, that kind of information. And then there was a committee that was made up of about 5 of us, I believe. And all the information that we got was, this is the household number, this is how many people, they lost their job, this is what they need. And then we would say yes or no. And it made me think of our local, or not only ours, but the system of like applying for food assistance. And I've worked there before, and the questions on those applications, and I was like, why do we need to know all of that information? It's very minimal information that we need for somebody to be able to access this. So those are some of the changes I think that were very good that we did in our organization. Eventually we went back to what we normally do, but I think that also contributed to, again, the success of, like I said, this resident-owned community, because it was a community that we had never organized in, but we had been already prior, because that just happened end of last year. Prior to that, we had been preview to making change and pivot and quickly, and so our mindset was already in that. And so we said, okay, well, this is happening in this community. We don't have funding we don't have any of the funding that says we're going to work in this community, but we know how to do this quickly, and that's where the general operating funds always are very helpful, because then we can just go and organize in any community that has the need. And that was a success there. And we're still continuing to make some of the changes in even our structure of our organizations because of the things that we saw through the pandemic. And the other thing too, that I think when you asked about something that I would leave behind, never do again, is very important. As much as I think we're all in this work to serve our communities, and we also have to take care of ourselves, and that is not something that a lot of us grew up with, especially when growing up in homes that you're food insecure, or other insecurities, but it's so important because then you just get something I learned is you just get so burnt out, you get resentful, and there was a very bad point that I was in that I was like, why are we so difficult to work with? I mean we, my people and myself. Luckily, I have the support to be able to work through some of that internalized racism, but not everybody does in our communities.
Thank you. Reminder to folks in the room, if you have a question that you've written down on your note card, please lift it up. My friends will gather those and bring them up to the stage if there's a question that you want to put into this space. One last one I have for each of you is, Zoe mentioned this concept of clarity about the challenges. And I'm curious from, not just the last couple of years, but from your experiences over the course of your life, what has clarified in your head about the tools that you have that are the most powerful for affecting change in community? Yesterday's focus was about the change within and ourselves. Today's focus is about producing change in community. Tomorrow we'll talk about changing systems. But as you think about the clarity that you have about the most powerful tool at your disposal, what comes to mind? Is it something that's traditional and sacred? Is it something new and innovative that you've done? But what have you learned to be a powerful tool?
I usually wait patiently. I will say it goes back to relationship again, and our relationships are largely transactional, right? We meet people, we shake hands, we're like, hey, nice to know you. Do we really want to know the person? Do we really want to know about that person? Do we really want to know what their trauma is, what they're all about at this profound level, right? And I think what I've learned, I spoke a little bit earlier about being angry and going into these policies, and the systems are definitely set up against Indigenous people. A lot of places, Alaska, we don't have leadership there. I was jokingly going to say, I got you beat. I got Sarah Palin. She's running again. Just saying. But I was angry for a long time doing this work. I was angry doing advocacy work. I went to Standing Rock. I'm an activist. I do environmental activism, climate activism, and at the same time, I'm an educator and a teacher, of students. We have our school. I was the education director for a while, and what I've come to realize is that there is a way to have transactional relationships, but there's a way to have meaningful, deep, profound partnerships and relationships. And that is the most sacred, powerful tool I've come across, which is that tool of really curiosity for another and their experiences and what they're all about. And then not so much of how we can benefit from each other, but just how we can learn from each other and be together. Like, I'm very curious of all of these women up here right now. I want to learn so much more. And you, I'm not leaving you out down there. Michael, sorry. But I just, that deep curiosity for people allows you to speak with your heart and connect with people on a different way. When we have council meetings and tough meetings, we first hug heart to heart because we want to connect our hearts before we do the hard work. And that connection with people and partners, I think, is what I've learned is my most powerful tool. And it helps me let go of the anger. And then I can, I think, be heard differently.
So I'd say that, similarly, recently have really been intentional to, I'd say, monitor whether or not, I'm engaged in transactional or transformative action. And I think obviously all of us who are in public health have right now been in having to address in this, striving towards transformation, preemption, The equity ceiling continues to be lowered and lowered and lowered. And so a tool that I found very, helpful, I adopted from GARE, which is the Government Alliance for Racial Equity. If you are in public service, I'd encourage you to, and aren't already, a member, it's a very important, I'd say, boot camp for those who are in government to kind of get best practices and be in a kind of, collegial setting specifically around equity. I learned a tool, and it is ACT. And I believe this is from Color of Change, but the ACT tool, the A is for affirm, counter, and transform. So in all of our action, we're going to be engaged in difficult conversations. And sometimes we don't know how to disrupt and redirect. The ACT tool I think, has been really, really helpful in this because so much of race talk, like we said, is volatile, right? But if we do want to eventually at least, move to a place of transformative change, having this little back pocket and, just mental, tool to be in meaningful conversation that, bridges and doesn't divide, has had great utility for me.
And I would echo what Lisa and Zoe both said, but relationships are the most precious tool that we have. And I think of the permaculture creed of earth care, people care, fair share. And I was able to be part of a living facilitation that our La Puente and I think the Colorado Health Foundation had their funding in, but we were able to do these living facilitation social permaculture trainings where we looked at relationships and community building through the systems of nature and thinking about hierarchical systems like a circulatory system, your brain and your, for fast action you might need that, but really the mycelium network of many voices at the table coming together to make something really powerful and rich. And so, yes, I echo that.
Same thing, relationships. Relationships I have learned is such key to all of this work. I'm thinking about just some of the successes in the work that I have done, and it has sometimes those phone calls with our stakeholders start with, when is the meeting for the manufactured home park, to, oh, I'm in this abusive relationship and how do I get out of it and where are the resources? And it's because we have that relationship built already. So I think definitely that's very key. I'll just tell a quick story about the resident-owned community. When it first went up for sale, the person that came up was from a different organization, not ours, and now the residents talk about it, and they're like, yeah, it was like this hippie guy that was knocking on doors. We didn't really pay attention to him because we were like, what is he trying to sell us? He's trying to scam us. And when they really got involved is when Lake County Build a Generation got involved and started community organizing. And what was so helpful, and I will take credit for this one, is that I already knew, like I said, we hadn't organized in that community, but I knew them personally, and a lot of them were from the same town back in Mexico, and that is what really, then they believed it, like, okay, this is real. So, and it's because we had that relationship built.
Thank you, and thank you all for your wonderful questions. I wish that I could get to every one of these. I shuffled them so that I could at least ask one in the time that we have remaining. And the one that ended up at the top of the shuffle was this one. Often the work is so hard and the change is so slow. How do you celebrate with community those important changes that you have achieved? So is there an example of a celebration, a way of honoring the change and all that you found to be impactful?
Well, I have one, and that was just receiving the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Culture of Health Prize was so affirming to all the years and years and years of work and partnerships and struggles. It was a beautiful acknowledgement, and to be able to bring that to our community was profound.
So every year in the springtime, the Culture of Health produces the county health rankings. And if you are among the 500 most populated counties in the U.S., you do have your data that comes out. And they are working to have those, I think close to 40 measures so that you can disaggregate them. So something that we do is we take that opportunity to engage with our policymakers, to share with them what the numbers say. However, in those areas where we are top performer, we always invite our community partners to have spotlights and to really share their big wins. So what it does, it's like it helps them connect to data, but also it helps us, again, give light and give lift to those very important local folks that are engaged in the action and making a difference and improving outcomes and really the juice behind our stellar or opportunity report card.
Awesome. I jokingly say I'm a party planner. We love celebration. Celebration is the balance to all the trauma. And so we just recently held an annual tribal celebration, which we hold every year. We couldn't hold it this past couple years, so we celebrated this year. We sang, we danced, we hula hoop contests, but the most important thing we did is we honored our community healers. And I think that's the key, is in our celebrations, we also use them for honoring. We've honored our women, our men, our children, our foster parents, and so our celebrations are tied to those values of respect. And so I think, yes, we love celebrations. We celebrate our elders every week, bringing them together to have lunch together with our community and make them feel valid. So I love a celebration.
I would say the biggest celebrations I think that we have had that our Latinx community really attends have been when there's carne asada and the posadas. Those have been the biggest ones. And even though we don't, we don't say like, hey, we want to celebrate your work. That's what we end up doing. We celebrate the communities that we work within.
Thank you. And thank you for that note of celebration. I want to celebrate and thank all of you, not just for being with us here today in this conversation, sharing your important perspective and experience with us, but for the work that you're doing with and in the communities that you came from. So thank you all for this conversation today.